Bloodsport is awesome. It skyrocketed Jean-Claude Van Damme into superstardom. It helped introduce and legitimize Muay Thai to the international community. It served as the primary inspiration for Mortal Kombat, countless other fighting games, even the MMA itself. And Donald Trump one time watched it on a plane in 1997. How bad could it be? If you look at any online list of the best martial arts tournament movies of all time, Bloodsport is bound to be on that list, and it will probably be at the top of that list. It stands as a perennial tournament film, and is watched and rewatched by countless fans to this day. It's awesome! But the question is, why? Why is it awesome? I mean, isn't it just a bunch of dudes beating the crap out of each other for 90 minutes? Or, if you're being even more uncharitable, isn't it a classic example of a white guy going to Asia and being better at doing Asian things than actual Asian people? I mean, just look at the film's Rotten Tomatoes score, for Pete's sake. Hardly Oscar material, wouldn't you say? Initial skepticism towards Bloodsport is understandable, especially when, at the end of the day, it is mostly just a bunch of guys beating the crap out of each other. However, I would argue that the appeal of Bloodsport runs quite a bit deeper than it might at first appear, even if it is not above using some pretty racist tropes and concepts in its execution.
You come upstairs with me for an interview.
Like hell, let go of me.
Leave the girl alone.
Fun fact, that man's name is Hasan. No, really, I'm not kidding. No, listen.
Why were you with Hasan?
See? Don't worry though, that this movie paid off that actor's student loans, okay? And I mean, surely that's a pretty noble cause. We can agree on that, right? Right? Okay, so back to the topic at hand. In this video, I want to articulate just why Bloodsport is awesome and why it remains beloved by many across the world. And to best illustrate what makes Bloodsport so unique, I'll be comparing and contrasting it to the other contender for greatest martial arts tournament movie of all time, Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon. So, buckle up, and let's get started.
Round one, fight!
So, to start things off, let's give a basic rundown of the plots of Bloodsport and Enter the Dragon. This is where we enter spoiler territory, so if you want to avoid those, skip here to this timestamp on the screen. Alright, so Bloodsport is a 1988 film starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. It tells the story of Frank Dukes, an American army captain who goes AWOL to participate in the Kumite, a secret international martial arts tournament. The greatest fighters in the world all gather to show off their skills, and Frank is no exception. As a child, Frank was roped into becoming the sparring partner of his neighbor, Shingo Tanaka. He eventually earned the respect of Senzo Tanaka, Shingo's teacher and father, and the Tanakas became Frank's second family. After Shingo died, Senzo was left with no heir to carry on the Tanaka family's martial arts. And so, desperate to not let his family's legacy die, Frank took on the task of living up to that legacy. Frank enters the Kumite as a means of proving the power of the Tanaka clan, and eventually succeeds, becoming the first Westerner to win the Kumite in the process. Enter the Dragon is a 1973 film starring Bruce Lee. It tells the story of Lee, a Shaolin martial arts instructor, who is tasked by the British government to help them take down the crime lord Han. Han was a former student of Lee's master, but he turned rogue and continues to use his training for criminal enterprises. Lee also learns that O'Hara, the man who was responsible for his sister's death, is working for Han as his right-hand man. Han is holding an international martial arts tournament for the greatest fighters in the world, and so, Lee enters the tournament as a pretense to avenge his sister's death and restore honor to his school. He succeeds on both counts, beating O'Hara and Han in one of the absolute best fight scenes in the history of martial arts cinema. So cool! Anyways, okay, spoilers over. Now, as you can tell from the plot descriptions alone, the key difference between the two films is the matter of their protagonists. Frank Dukes and Lee are wildly different characters, with different backstories, motivations, and personalities. Their differences are akin to those of the Tiger and the Dragon, or, if you want to get technical, Spider-Man and Superman. Lee is, of course, the Superman in this case. The first 3 scenes of Enter the Dragon, before the title credits even roll, involve him beating a young Sammo Hung in combat, demonstrating his spiritual knowledge to his master, and teaching a student of his with a line that has become immortal in its own right.
Don't think. Feel.
Everything about Lee exudes confidence and control. He is at a level above most mortal men, and yet, instead of absolute power absolutely corrupting, absolute power has absolved him of human shortcomings and inadequacies. Even when confronting the man who caused his sister's death, Lee only loses his cool for the briefest of moments, and he instantly regrets it afterwards. There is never any doubt that Lee will succeed in his goals. The question is simply, how? Frank, in contrast, is Spider-Man. Even though he is clearly a skilled martial artist, his establishing scenes demonstrate not his competence, but rather his resilience. All the training flashbacks we see of Frank mostly involve him getting beat up and enduring restrictions. And the montage at the beginning of the film clearly shows that, skilled as Frank is, he is ultimately just one of many equally skilled fighters. And while the immortal line,
Or don't hit back.
is spoken by the hero of Enter the Dragon, in Bloodsport it is spoken by the villain.
Very good. But brick, not hit back.
In both cases, the message is that isolated training is not necessarily useful in an actual combat situation, but in Bloodsport it is meant to show just how tangible the possibility of defeat really is for Frank. Essentially, Lee is defined by having no limits, while Frank is defined by surpassing his limits.
Now you begin to exceed your limits.
What limits?
And this difference in characterization is reflected in the different approaches taken with every aspect of each film. Han's tournament is an extravagant affair, with hundreds of contestants, feasts and pleasure courtesans galore, and all arranged on a private island to give it that added mysterious vibe. The Kumite, meanwhile, is quite literally a hole in the wall, set in the middle of a squatter settlement, and in the opening montage, we see the tournament being set up by hand, giving the whole thing a makeshift vibe. Similarly, the antagonists of both films are wildly different. Han is a criminal mastermind, with an army behind him and an enterprise before him. But Chong Li, the reigning Kumite champion, is just an unstoppable killing machine. He has no ambition or drive other than to prove his skill, and rather than a mastermind, he is just another contestant in the tournament, albeit a highly skilled and dangerous one. But the most important difference, which highlights the true enduring appeal of Bloodsport, lies in the differing messages of the two films. Bruce Lee's films are treatises. Their primary purpose is to teach aspects of Kung Fu, both physical and spiritual, to a wider audience. Every one of his movies involves some kind of lesson, whether demonstrated in the combat or stated in the dialogue. And the character of Lee is, again, a calm and knowledgeable teacher. What then is Frank Dukes? He isn't a teacher. He isn't a Superman. He isn't even Japanese, despite knowing karate and having a Japanese teacher. He's just a guy whose sole motivation for entering the Kumite is to prove the worth of his teacher's lessons. That's it. No personal vengeance, no higher mission, no deeper motivation. He simply wants to carry on a legacy.
Round 2, fight.
Stop me if you've heard this one before. So, there's this guy. He's a bright, rising star in the field of martial arts. And he's a maverick, someone born in America, who applies a new world way of thinking to the ancient martial arts that have been passed down to him. He is set to conquer the world and change martial arts forever, when suddenly he dies. And his friends, family, teachers, students, the world is left to pick up the pieces of the legacy he left behind. Sound familiar? Bloodsport, dumb 80s action movie that it is a story about legacy. And to understand that legacy, it becomes necessary to understand the story of Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco, raised in Hong Kong, and when he came of age, he moved to Seattle to teach martial arts. At this time, practices such as Shaolin Kung Fu were forbidden to outsiders, especially non-Chinese. Lee defined tradition, first by taking American students, and then by developing his own martial art, Jeet Kune Do. He believed that arrogance and isolationism would lead to the downfall of martial arts, and that students should not be selected based on their background, but their desire to learn. He changed martial arts, and subsequently the world, but tragically passed away in 1973. He had so much more to teach. However, Lee's legacy lives on through his friends, family, teachers, and students. Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Donnie Yen, Chuck Norris, Dan Inosanto, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and countless others, including the Karate Tiger himself, Jean-Claude Van Damme. Everything in Bloodsport is a tribute to that legacy. From the casting of Lee film alumni, to the setting of Lee's Hong Kong, to the very concept of martial artists from every corner of the world and every style competing out of sheer love for their craft. Frank and we are united in our desire to do right by our teacher's legacy. Frank is not Lee. He still has many more limits to overcome and many more lessons to learn. But in Bloodsport, we see a snapshot of his journey, and we are inspired to keep at our own journeys and cultivate our own kung fu. Honestly, the casting of Van Damme has, thanks to recent years, taken on a bittersweet element, since his more recent movies are all about failing to live up to a legacy, coming to terms with that failure, and learning to laugh at yourself. This is, in its own way, a lesson just as important. But even if none of us can ever achieve the same level of fame and enlightenment that Bruce Lee did, we keep trying. We keep going because even though the journey never ends, it is through its undertaking that we better ourselves. We may never live up to our teacher's legacy. Frank may never live up to Lee's teachings. And Spider-Man may never live up to Superman's standard. But so long as life runs through our veins, it is our duty to keep at the journey.
Finish him.
Kung Fu is a word that defines any skill or ability cultivated through hard work over time. Any person can demonstrate Kung Fu through any form of task or activity. The important thing is that we continue to cultivate it. Mastery of an undertaking is not the end. It is simply the beginning of new levels of mastery to be further unlocked. A fighter has not reached the end simply because they have won a tournament. An artist has not reached the end simply because they have won an award. And a philosophy has not reached the end simply because its teacher has died. Even Bruce Lee, who originated and developed many new and exciting philosophies of martial arts, was once a student of Ip Man. And just as Lee formed his own identity unique to Ip Man, so too have his students formed their own identities, unique to him. Students learn, grow, and someday surpass their masters before they take on students of their own, who also learn, grow, and someday surpass them. This is the nature of legacy, of Kung Fu. And for one moment in 1988, the students came out to perform for the spirit of their teacher, to demonstrate the power of his art, and to live up to his legacy. I'm Mark O'Keen, signing off, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, and you'd like to see me make more, please leave a like or comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.
No.
Oh my god, you could bounce a nickel off those buns. What? Sorry, what was I saying? Yeah.